I want to hit on an overall topic that is hitting college football. And it's something we've talked about for literally years, but it is in a different chapter of that conversation. That's playoff expansion. So we just got through the first year of the 12-team college football playoff. Overall, huge success, right? More teams were involved. They were in the hunt. They were in the race. There's so many meaningful games in November. Yes, there were blowouts in the first round of the playoff, but we had some great games the rest of the way, and you felt like you were crowning a deserving champion. And it was a champion that had lost to their rival in an incredibly painful way, and they had something to play for, and they could play it out on the field afterwards. Anyway, this format was 12 teams. The top 5 conference champions were automatic qualifiers. The top 4 seeds were the top 4 conference champions. And that led to, you had some imbalanced brackets because you had teams that were, technically ranked above those conference champions getting spots below them. We talked a lot about how, Texas's path and Penn State's paths were, quote, easy on paper, right? Because of the unbalanced seeding. They both made it to the national semifinals. So there's already been this conversation. This was something the Big Ten pushed a year ago as well. But we're going to have this conversation over the coming weeks and months. And this really isn't about this coming season. This is about 2 years from now, the 2026 season and beyond, where it's kind of like a, clean slate. Big Ten, the SEC, essentially have unilateral power to change the format. They, have to be consulted and have advice from the Big 12 and the ACC. But Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti can do essentially what they want, even if it is unpopular or even if it is something that not a lot of people want. And one of the topics that's coming back around to be on the table and have conversations about is multiple automatic qualifiers. Do the SEC and the Big Ten, based on historical trends, probably going to get 3 to 4 teams in each year. Do they get 3 automatic spots, 4 automatic spots? There's a model where it's 4-4, and then the ACC and the Big 12 get 2. There's a spot for the Group of 5 champion. Notre Dame has protections throughout all of this, that if they're ranked in the top 14 or top 16, if we're talking about 16-team bracket, that they can get in as an at-large team. But these conversations are back at the center of the sport. So there's just a series of meetings, and people need to make these decisions just with enough lead time to figure out if anything that's going to change. Now, there's been a ton of pushback, right, from fans, from folks in the ACC and the Big 12 about these multiple AQs. You could look at a 14-team bracket versus a 16-team bracket, extra spots. I want to get your thoughts on where this all stands or how you would prefer. I mean, because there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Like, I understand why the Big Ten and the SEC want this, because it's certainty. It takes away the question marks of a selection committee, and the human element allows you could create like a championship weekend and a play-in game for your 3rd and 4th spot if they're automatic qualifiers. But for the entirety of the sport, I think it's challenging, right? Like you're starting the season and saying like, nope, your league is so much better than ours that your 4 best teams will get automatically considered and invites more than mine. Right. Or there's so many layers to this. So I just want to get your perspective on this debate as it kind of takes over college football's offseason.
Well, it's interesting because you have the influence of power, right, with the Big Ten and the SEC. There's no doubt about that. They're going to be the controlling figure, and anytime a conversation takes place, it's going to go through those 2 conferences because of the revenue that it creates. In terms of the 16-team playoff, I think that's exactly where we're going to be going to, at least 14, but I would guess 16. And number one, it's another revenue stream for these conferences. You know how much money that they're going to pay for next year, however many games that is, two games. In addition to that, I do think that it has, and it's going to have an impact on kids that are coming out and where they want to go to school. Because if you think about the Big Ten and the SEC, if they get an automatic 4 bids into the college football playoff, and from a visibility standpoint as a player, I think that's going to also influence players' decisions on what conferences to go to, who to play for. And if you're the Big Ten and the ACC on the outside looking in from the decision makers, and you're saying, well, we only get 2, but what about if we go on a historic year like the Pac-12 did in their last season as a conference, and you've got 4 teams that could easily probably be vying for a playoff spot, but because they've only got two and the Big Ten's having a bad year, well, they're still going to get 4 teams in. I think that that's where the conversation and the discrepancy comes up and why people might argue opposite of that. Now, in terms of 16-team playoff, I also think it's going to seriously impact the conference championship games. With all these conferences now going to 9 conference games, particularly the SEC is the last one kind of to hold out. They still had 8, but I think that they're going to go to a nine-game conference schedule. When you look at the conference championship games, I don't think that does anything for the conference or those teams that are bidding for one of those number 1 seeds, because they have an extra game. And while they might grab that first round bye, if they have 16 teams, I don't know how they would do the bye. They wouldn't have buys, right? They'd have to play a conference championship game, beat each other up. The 2 top teams from that conference and the SEC or whoever else are going to be going to the playoffs, and they're going to have to play right away for 4 potential more weeks to put your best effort out.
There's no incentive to play in those games.
There's no incentives. And at the end of the day, I think that that's going to be another discussion point, is whether or not they do away with that. One, for the player themselves, because that's a lot of football being played when you're talking about college. But number 2, the value of the game and the importance of the game gets diminished based on the new playoff structure.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, I've been an advocate of getting rid of conference championship games with an expanded playoff. I just don't think you need them. And but I get it. Like this is the reasoning that the Big Ten and those in the SEC that support this would say, okay, you could still have something that weekend, but maybe your 1 and 2 get a bye. So, or they don't have to play. They get the automatic spots.
Right.
And then you have like 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 to play in to those automatic spots. So it makes it more like it creates more value for your conference race, which again, you are the Big Ten commissioner. You are the SEC commissioner. I get why you're doing this. You just don't have people who are like, is this what's best for college football as a whole? Because like in your example of like a really super strong Pac-12 in the last year, you need more at large spots. Like even if you went to 14 or 16, but said it was 1 through 14, like in the rankings, 1 through 16 in the rankings, you're still going to have a lot of Big Ten and SEC teams. So that's where I think the pushback is of, do you need this special designation, the automatic spots, when you're going to get teams in there anyway? Like they're already going to have the benefits of the resources, the revenue coming in for like to pay their players, like the facilities, the coaches. They're still going to have best teams, right? And on a down year, like last year, down year for the SEC, you still had 3 in, right? So I think that's where like it's off-putting for a lot of people. So I'll be curious, if they can eventually get it to the finish line. Because again, they can. If the SEC, I think the Big Ten is more on board, like top to bottom, everyone involved on this type of model. If the SEC gets there, they can do it. But it fundamentally changes college football's postseason and like the way that it works if they do that. I think it becomes harder to sell as like a national championship. It becomes more of like the best of the Big Ten, the best of the SEC, which again, you were already going to have anyway, right?
Right.
So I think it just kind of formalizes some things that already naturally happen. But it allows them to do what they want with their league championships and create value in their own conferences. But that's what you have when you just don't have centralized leadership. You don't have a Roger Goodell. You don't have somebody that is trying to, if you add games or if you do things, it's like, because everyone gets a part of the pot, right? This is different. And so I think that's why you end up in this situation, which again, I think like Joshua said it on our pod here, like he doesn't like it. He would much rather it be at large spots. And I think that there's a lot of fans that feel that way, even in those 2 conferences of people who root for teams in those conferences. But it's just such a weird place that the sport is in, because there's always decisions at many points in college football's history that aren't like the most logical, but like they just kind of like, it's just like a power struggle. And there's no centralized power. So you end up with these like kind of strange compromises. So I'm very curious to see where this lands, because I do think 14 or 16 and the changing of the actual schedule and the structure, what it could do for conference championships, I'm a fan of that. Or if you go to 14 and you only have 2 teams that have buys, because we saw the teams that were really rusty coming off buys, right? Like there's some
How many teams that had a bye actually won? Georgia? That was it?
No, it was 0.
0. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
0.
Georgia didn't play. Yeah. Georgia's first game was their loss. Yeah, all of them lost.
All of them. So you're like, oh, it's been, guys, you got the bye, you won your conference. This is awesome. You're the highest ranked in your conference, and you go in and you get drummed and you're out of the playoffs. And so it's like, well, wait, this kind of backfired a little bit. Now, I do believe that the
1
teams
year's
that
data
were
too. So
right, it's
right,
1
and
year's
two of
data.
those were would have been low ranked teams if you did it
Of course.
1 through 12. So that's another thing. Like, why are we fixing something that isn't broken? Let's just fix the seeding question and the rankings, and see what happens. But it's definitely something that could change and could shift. And like you said, I mean, I think it would have a drastic impact on recruiting and a lot of other things if you're just automatically saying like these two leagues are here, everybody else is here, and then at large teams you're here.
Yeah, just take the top 16 teams in the nation. I know that's the biggest issue is that it's all subjective, right? It's strength of schedule. How do you compare the strength of schedule between an SEC team and an ACC team? And are those quality wins that they have, are those better than the quality wins that the ACC has? And then that's where I think interconference play needs to happen. And you have to see these two. You need more of it. And when you go to a 9-game schedule within the conference, you limit that opportunity for the SEC to go play some of the Big Ten. Can you imagine when you get like a Penn State versus a Texas or an Oregon versus Georgia or whatever it might be? Those are games that people get excited about. But then that's when you start to see, can the ACC, can the Big Ten compete at the same level that the Big Ten and the SEC can compete, and then make a name for themselves and say, hey, when it's the top 16 teams, those are the top 16 teams going regardless. It's not because you get 4 teams in, regardless of whether that team's ranked 20th, we still get that 4th team in from the Big Ten or the SEC. Instead, this is the top 16 that the committee said are the top teams in the nation. Let's let them play it out.
Yeah, and then the rebuttal to that again would be, hey, this is a Big Ten or SEC team. They have more losses because our league is so big and challenging and all of this. And they scheduled an out of conference game that was like a high profile game and they lost it, or whatever. But our teams are better, even though your ACC team has fewer losses, because like the league isn't as strong. So that's where you're like, okay, well, again, I understand why they're like, well, I don't want the human element. I want to take the subjectivity out of this, and just have automatic spots like you play into, in the NFL and in other leagues where you play into your spots and there's not like a human selection committee deciding these things. But this is how college football has operated. And I think that part is what rubs people the wrong way, is just the assumption before any games are played that these teams, that the 4 best are better than everyone else. And so it's going to be really interesting to see where this lands. I think too, like what you're saying of like, we want more crossover crossover competition. Again, this cold, the brain fog. The SEC and the Big Ten are telling you that they'll do that if they get this model passed, right? That they'd be more willing to schedule those games because then losses don't matter as much.
Then they're not going to be punished as much, for sure.
Yes. And I get that. Like, if you're trying to sell that to coaches, for sure. Like, everyone, we just went through this. Like, everyone freaked out when teams had 2-3 losses, even though like that wasn't necessarily eliminating them. So I think that's why all of this stuff is interconnected. And it's going to be interesting to see where it shakes out. And if, what does happen if they do pass this multiple AQs? What is that shift look like? The separation between the big 2 and everybody else, it's already there. It's already been widening that gap. But does that continue? Does it accelerate? If you're saying you get 4 CFP spots and you only get 2, it's going to be really fascinating to watch play out.
It's going to be. And then I have one more question for you, Nicole. How do you think it will impact Notre Dame? Because in terms of these conferences, like I said, if they go to a 9-game conference schedule, there's going to be less big-time schools and big-time matchups for Notre Dame to be able to schedule. I know that they've got their deal with the ACC, but when you look at some of the biggest games that Notre Dame has with the USCs of the world, especially with USC now playing in the Big Ten later in the season, does that rivalry still maintain? But even Notre Dame, Ohio State from 2 years ago, when you look at that matchup and what they have, are those going to go by the wayside for Notre Dame, or are they all going to have to be in the beginning of the season and have a willing opponent and a willing conference to say, we're going to take that risk of taking a loss early to Notre Dame versus where are they going to go if this continues in the way that it is?
It's a great question, because whenever I get asked about Notre Dame's independence, I'm always like, okay, the things that are most important: path to play for a national championship, ability to schedule like a full
Right.
schedule the way that you want it to look, and then home for the Olympic sports. So the ACC schedule does allow them to check off a couple of those boxes. And it seems like the ACC is going to be working with them to make sure that they're playing like the bigger brands, the better teams in the ACC. So those are more, high quality matchups year in and year out. But it's a real concern if you go to, I think 9, you can still have enough wiggle room, right? And the Big Ten already was working with USC and Notre Dame to make sure that game can be played when it usually does. And they'll adjust their league schedule around that to make it happen. But, if you go to like 10 conference games, let's game this out further. There's just fewer opportunities of games where you control it and you can schedule it. And how do you fill out a schedule for November? Like you said, when do you figure out who's going to play you in October when conference schedules heat up for everybody else? So I think that's a really good question, because I think championship access, that part worked out great for Notre Dame. They had the worst loss in ACFP contender ever, and they were able to make it, and they made it all the way in the national championship game. The question is going to be scheduling if it gets scrunched. And again, if you're the Big Ten or the SEC, you want that scrunch. You want them to feel that pressure so that they join one of your leagues.
Come on in.
You're like, you want to play good teams? You want to play these teams? You want to play? You could just join our league.
By the end, by the end of this thing, Notre Dame will be in the Big Ten, guaranteed. That's my feeling.
We'll see. They're a
Big Ten team. I'll say they're a Big Ten team.
Well, this is your sell as the Big Ten. Hey, look at all these teams you traditionally play. They're in our league.